Hi, I'm Josh, and I'm grateful you're here with me today. In the month of September, I didn't acquire any new games, but I did play 8 unique games, half of which I have rated 8.5 out of 10 or higher, so there were some really excellent games played, and as usual, I'll go through these 8 games in order of my lowest rated game to my highest rated game. I'm just editing this part in after the fact because I realized while I was editing this video that this is my 100th board game themed video, so a little something to celebrate, I guess. And I thought I'd let you know that I am still trying to improve my videos a little bit, so I'm doing a couple of minor changes to make my videos a better experience for you. One thing I've done is I've cut out the little title page, theme page that I do near the beginning of my video, that little 10 to 15 second thing with my theme music and the title of the video and all that stuff. I just remove that because even if it's just 10 or 15 seconds long, that's 10 or 15 seconds of your time that I'm wasting every single video, because you know what channel this is, you know what this video is about because you saw the title of the video, so it's just kind of an unnecessary waste of your time. The other thing I've done starting with this video is I've always, when I've split my videos into chapters, especially with these board game roundup videos I do every month, I've always just numbered the chapters, game 1, game 2, game 3, and so on. And to be perfectly transparent, the reason I've done that is I thought, well, if I don't put the names of the games, then it'll kind of force people to stay with my videos longer, to engage with my video a little bit more, because it's not immediately apparent necessarily which game I'm talking about at each chapter. But now I'm just doing away with that, and I'm labeling each chapter of this video based on the game that I'm talking about, so that you can see at a glance all the games that I'm talking about. You can skip any you're not interested in, go straight to the ones that maybe you are interested in, or shut the video off and go do something else if nothing of interest shows up here. And I don't need to play any dumb games to try to keep people on my videos for any longer than they want to be here. Yeah, it's taken me over 250 videos to make these changes, so maybe I'm not the fastest learner ever, but I am trying to gradually make the experience better for you as the viewer. And most importantly, thank you for just watching my videos, allowing me to keep going here after 100 plus videos of board gaming content. And thank you most of all to my Patreon supporters for your very real practical support of me and what I'm doing here. So let's get on with it. Cheers. The first one that I'm going to talk about is a cooperative game that I played with my younger son Wyatt called Castle Panic. This is one that he requested to play with me again because it is one of his favorite games. Although this time around I played it with both my sons, with him and Evan. Now, when Wyatt puts together a game of Castle Panic for us, he likes to throw in a lot of the monsters from the different expansions, which can tend to lead to very long games. However, this time around, we worked together very efficiently with the three of us, and we ended up winning the game, even though our castle got pretty well battered. But being a game that all three of us have played a lot over the years, we did pretty well together. And this is a game that I rate 6.5 out of 10. Wyatt rates it a perfect 10 out of 10. Like I said, this is one of his favorites. And I didn't write down Evan's rating of the game, so I'm gonna have to look that up and put that on screen as well. Next up is another old game called Star Realms. This is one that I've played a ton over the years. In the many years since it's been released, I played it in person a lot, and I also have played the Steam version by myself on the computer quite a bit. And this time around, though, is the first time I have ever played with some expansions for Star Realms. So we played with the Star Realms Crisis Heroes and the Star Realms Crisis Events expansions, and this time it was Paul and I who were playing together, and we were playing Paul's copy that had these extra expansions. Star Realms is a 2-player, very pure deck building game where you start with your basic cards and you gradually acquire more and more powerful cards, and you try to get your opponent down to 0 life. And Paul and I were going back and forth quite a bit, but in the end he did end up beating me down pretty good. He had something like 36 out of his 40 starting life remaining when I got down to 0, because he kept healing up again after I would take his health down. So he ended up winning that one, and I did enjoy both the heroes and and the events expansions, but I especially liked the heroes and what they added to the game. So it was very fun to try the expansions. They didn't change the game too terribly much, so I still rate the game about a 6.5 out of 10. This time it's Paul's rating I don't have written down, so I'll have to ask him and get that on screen here. And when I've played Star Realms with Evan in the past, apparently he is rated at 10 out of 10, which is what I've recorded here. That doesn't sound right, but that's what's written down on my piece of paper. So there you go. Accuracy is in question. I don't know if he would still rate this game 10 out of 10, but obviously he's enjoyed it when I've played with him in the past, because I do have a copy of just the base game. Next we have another simple two-player game. This time it's built around polyomino tile laying. So very puzzly game called Patchwork, where you are acquiring these funny shaped tiles. You're trying to get them to fit onto your board and make a perfect little square patchwork. There's a cute little income based on acquiring buttons, which allows you to get better tiles and whatnot. This game, it came together for me so perfectly. Normally it's kind of a struggle with this button income to keep your income going, but I just was generating a lot of income, didn't struggle with it at all, and by the end of the game I only had 3 blank squares left on my entire grid, so I ended up with 42 victory points, whereas Paul had a significantly negative score, because this is a score where you can end up in the negative below 0. So yeah, it came together really well for me. Unfortunately though, so I'm a person who doesn't necessarily love playing with the type of gamers who are very precious about their board games, who don't allow food and drink on the table, who have to sleeve all their cards, and who treat everything with kid gloves and everything has to be in mint condition when it goes back on the shelf again. I mean, board games are meant to be played and enjoyed, and I don't mind the kind of wear and tear that happens naturally over time. However, this time around, for the first time in a very, very long time, I ended up spilling on the game. So I ended up spilling a bit of soy sauce on Paul's Patchwork game here, while we were enjoying some very nice sushi from my favorite restaurant. And so as soon as it happened, I said, well, I guess this is my copy of Patchwork now, and I'll be buying you a new one. And Paul said, oh no, don't worry about it. It's, I don't play it much, and we got it cleaned up okay. But I'm not about to take food and eat it on somebody's game table and not get them a new game if I spill some of that food on there. So I ended up picking up the Halloween version of Patchwork for Paul, which looks super cool. Like, instead of buttons, it's got eyeballs for the income, and apparently they've tweaked the game very slightly to balance the tile selection a little bit, so it looks awesome. And Paul ended up giving me his copy of Patchwork. So I rate this game a 7 out of 10. Again, I haven't done my homework ahead of time. I gotta ask Paul what his rating of Patchwork is. With the next game, we got back to deck building again, and Paul and I played a game of Trains, plus the Rising Sun expansion. Oh, I just shat myself. Oh, Crohn's disease sucks. Oh, lordy. Well, that's a first on camera. Oh dear. Oh man. The next one is another deck building game. Paul and I got back to the game Trains, plus the Rising Sun expansion. We played on another 2-player map where we both kind of started side by side and had to work our railway lines up the map. This time around we did a totally random assortment of cards that were available to purchase. So as with both deck building games, we start with our basic hand of cards and we could purchase these new cards, upgraded cards to add to our hands. And in the past I've always kind of tried to mix together some interesting themed decks. So I remember once I put together a bunch of cards that were geared towards getting a lot of money and then using the money to be able to do stuff on other cards. And I can't remember what else I've done, but it was, this time around, it was totally random, which was kind of fun to try. I ended up pulling off another victory, which I felt like this is the month that I finally figured out board games, because I'm not used to winning games, but here I won 32-21 by very specifically pushing the build track action to move really quickly up that map and to get to kind of the high point cities. Now, this ended up leading to a bit of a less than satisfying game because it really felt like I hadn't accomplished much, whereas in the past when I did my themed decks, I felt like I could build an interesting deck of cards. This time it was like build track as fast as possible, victory, and it was over pretty quick. So it's not the first time I've ended quickly and left a feeling of dissatisfaction, but you know, it was still fun to play. I do enjoy this game. I rate it 7 out of 10. Paul gives it a rating of 7.5 out of 10. We now are going to talk about another train-themed game. This one I like a fair bit better, called Railways of Europe. Paul and I played 2-player again on the Europe map specifically, which is pretty well designed for 2 players, although it's still fairly large space for the 2 of us. The last time we played, the 2 of us started very close together and were competing neck and neck for all the railway tracks we were trying to build and all the goods we were trying to deliver. Railways of Europe is definitely a much bigger, more I would say more involved game than Trains is, in that you are very focused on a lot of different things. There's a really tight economy trying to get money going. There's railway routes that you got to plan that are going to most efficiently be able to deliver goods, as well as complete different railway lines for extra points. So there's a fair bit going on, but once again, this is another game that just completely felt in place so easily. I didn't have to worry about money at all. Like, my income engine just went up quickly and I wasn't short on cash at all, which is unusual for this game. So again, I ended up with a runaway victory of 100 victory points to 72. And so it was interesting to see how that differed from the previous game, because like I said, the last game we played together, we started very close together. This time we started on very distant parts of the map, and so we were able to kind of do our own thing without getting in each other's way too much. And I feel like that space allowed me to really kind of push towards my own goals without having to worry about another player interfering with what I was trying to do, and I guess it worked out for me this time around. But this is a long-time favorite. I rate this game 8.5 out of 10. Paul rates it a 9 out of 10, so both of us are fond of this old railway game. In the back of my mind, I still feel like there's a railway game out there for me that perfectly encapsulates the mixture of route building your railway tracks, plus having shares that you can increase by delivering cubes. So they're called, what are they, cube rail games, or they're not fully 18xx games, which is a whole big, complicated, share-focused, income-focused type of railway game. But I feel like I'd like something kind of approaching that. I'm not exactly sure. I've been out on the lookout for years for something along those lines that really gets that perfectly lined up with my own particular tastes. But anyways, moving on to the next one. I was happy to keep working through Battles of Westeros. This time we've been working through the Wardens of the West expansion. After completing the 10-game base game expansion, we played the second of 3 games in the Wardens of the West campaign. I don't know if you remember from the previous time we had played it, I had got these new pikemen, which could be set in a more defensive formation and were really good for defending against cavalry attacks, or they could be set in more of an offensive formation and have strong attacks at the risk of leaving themselves very vulnerable to any counterattacks. And so in the previous game, I had set them to the offensive mode because that's the type of gamer I am. I'm not cautious and defensive. I'm more get out there and have fun. So I learned my lesson this time, and I said, okay, I'm only going to set them for that offensive formation initially, and then once we really get going, I'm going to pull back into a defensive formation. However, my pikeman units all ended up being completely wiped out on turn 1, and I didn't even get a chance to turn them defensive. So yeah, that maybe I didn't quite learn my lesson as much as I thought I had. This particular scenario was based on controlling 5 different objectives on the map, and at one point during the game I controlled all 5 objectives, but on the final round of the game I ended up earning an instant loss condition by losing too many units and having my morale drop to 0. Although even if I had not suffered that instant loss, I still would have lost on the objectives part of the goals, because I at that point only had 1 of the 5 objectives. So either way, I would have got smoked in that particular game. I rate Battles of Westeros 9 out of 10, and Paul rates it 8 out of 10. Moving on to what is one of our favorite cooperative games of all time. We got back to Spirit Island with the Branch and Claw expansion and the Jagged Earth expansion. This was the first time using one of the Jagged Earth spirits that I played a spirit that was at the very hard level of difficulty to play. This was a spirit called Starlight Seeks Its Form, which is very much a build your own spirit in that it offers you just a huge world of options, and it's completely up to you how you play the game, to how you kind of build out your spirit and its particular abilities. I was proud of Paul too, because he took on a hard spirit, which it's probably only his first or second time playing a hard spirit. He tends to stick with kind of the easier medium level difficulties. As he said to me, quote, "Real life is hard enough," which obviously you can't argue with that. So I can understand not wanting to create too many stresses for yourself in your board gaming time. But yeah, so this time I played a very hard spirit, Paul played a hard spirit, and the invaders filled our island with disease and blight, but the two of us just managed to work well together and we pulled off the victory. So it was a glorious victory. It was probably one of our most hard-fought victories, which made it all that much more satisfying. But Spirit Island continues to just blow us away. I rate the game 9.5 out of 10. This is a perfect 10 out of 10 for Paul, so always happy to get to Spirit Island. This final game is one of my all-time favorites, but before I get into it, I want to provide some context by talking about a part of board gaming that I don't think is talked about very much, and that is the fragility of some board game designs based on how much they require the players to be reliable. Specifically, I'm talking about games that have hidden information, which most games, especially competitive games, do involve some kind of hidden information. Depending on how much that is an important part of the gameplay, kind of determines A, how easy it might be for a player to cheat at the game if they really wanted to, or B, how vulnerable the game is to falling apart if a player isn't paying close enough attention, for instance. So one example I'll give is with deduction games. So with competitive deduction games in particular, players are trying to collect information from each other and from the game and trying to pull all this information together to work out a solution for something. And I very much recall one instance in a game called Mystery of the Abbey, which was a somewhat Clue-inspired deduction game. And I remember that particular night, I think there was probably 4 of us playing, and at one point in the game, one player accidentally gave a false piece of information to one of the players, and then as the game progressed, that false piece of information got passed along to other players, so that by the time we got to the point in the game where players were kind of risking their game bait to make some kind of accusation or a clue-like revelation that this is what I think is the situation, we realized, oh, this game is now completely messed up. We can't actually solve this game because this one piece of erroneous information ended up working its way into our system here. So the game was broken by an inattentive player in that case. So another example is one of my very favorite genres of games, as you'll know if you're a longtime viewer of my channel, are these one versus all hidden movement games where you have one player doing secret hidden movement on a map and other players trying to hunt them down, find their location, perhaps attack them or destroy them in some way. But you got one player sneaking around and everybody else working together to try to nab that hidden player. Because of how those games are designed, the person doing the hidden movement tends to have the most challenging game, both perhaps rules-wise and in terms of the gameplay itself. And so, because I'm more often than not the one who's teaching a game to the people I'm playing with, in all the years that I've been playing these type of games, typically I'm the player who plays that hidden movement role. Although if you want to go all the way back, my love for this type of genre started with Scotland Yard. I'm playing that as a very young child with my family. But yeah, so this is something that I've done quite a bit over the years. And one thing I've kind of discovered in playing that role over the years is that there's almost a GM-like aspect to that role, in that especially with the longer, more complex versions of these games, that player really can dictate the play experience for everybody else. So one example is, for a long time I considered the game Fury of Dracula to be sort of the peak of this genre, in that it's a big, complex game. The Dracula player has to run around Europe while the vampire hunters try to locate Dracula and attack him and bring him to 0 life. And because it is a big, complex game, the gameplay can run anywhere from an hour to 4+ hours, depending on how long it takes the hunters to track Dracula down. So this is a game that I would play every year around Halloween as a Halloween-themed game day, and it would be the main event of the night that I would always do. And like I said, I pretty much always played Dracula, and I recall a specific game where I was playing with a full table of 5 players. I think 3 of them were new to the game, and we were into the game maybe an hour and a half or so, and I was running around. At one point, I found myself as a Dracula character, kind of one city away from Mina Harker, one of the vampire hunters. And at that point, I had a choice. I knew that I could sort of turn and run away and keep running around Europe, and it might be an hour or 2 of gameplay before the other hunters could kind of really track down my trail and find me and locate me. Or I could do a sneak attack in the dead of night against Mina Harker and go for a high-risk chance of victory through a hunter defeat. So on the one hand, I knew that running away is probably the action that would most likely lead to my victory, whereas the attack option would really elevate the excitement level of the game, but could very well, the odds were against me for winning in that manner. So I realized at that moment that as the hidden movement player who was kind of dictating the flow of the game to a certain extent, the best choice in that moment was to do the attack, have this exciting battle, and just see where it went, see what happens. And so that's what I did. And ultimately I ended up losing the game, but it didn't leave other players to sit at the table for a couple hours wandering around Europe trying to find me. So that's sort of what I mean when it's like a GM type role. This was made even more clear when I tried to introduce this style of game to my family. So when my kids were younger, I had a very simple game in this genre called Whitehall Mystery, which was very much on the same level of simplicity as Scotland Yard, but was done in kind of an interesting manner. So when my kids were young, I played as the hidden criminal trying to run around the map, while my wife at the time and my 2 young kids played as the police players trying to find and locate me. And in that case, I played the game too well, because while I was excited to introduce this type of game to my kids, being a favorite genre of mine, I played it too well. The kids and my ex spent the whole game running around trying to find me, ultimately didn't find me. I won the game, and it ended up being just kind of a frustrating experience for them, and they didn't ask to play that game with me again. And I kind of at that point lost the opportunity to kind of get them hooked on that genre of game that I had loved since I was a kid. So jumping forward to September, now I got to take out Specter Ops with the Broken Covenant expansion, and I got to play it with my older son Evan and a friend of ours. And once again, I was excited to introduce this to Evan, because I was like, okay, here's another chance for me to introduce this genre to my kid. Hopefully we can have a lot of fun, and maybe this can be part of our regular rotation. So we got into it. My friend offered to play the secret person running around while Evan and I chase after them, which I thought was great because I could team up with Evan, and I could, for a change, play the other side of it, play the hunter side of things. But
Tavares, right in the butt? What? No.
We played through the whole game. Me and Evan, as the hunters, only got one glimpse of our quarry on the map, one brief glimpse, and the rest of the time completely missed them, and the hidden agent ended up kind of running away with the victory on around turn 21 or 22 out of a potential, I think the game could last about 40 to 45 turns if it went to full length. So yeah, basically Evan and I spent the entire game just running around, chasing shadows, accomplishing nothing, and basically losing without coming anywhere close to a victory. Now, as I like to do at the end of these games, I pulled out the hidden player's movement sheet just to see where they went on the board, to see where exactly we had missed them, because, I mean, a big part of the fun of these games is the replaying it afterwards, saying, oh, they went over there when I was here, and then when I thought you were over there, you were actually down here, and I just missed you here, and sort of tracking through the game. But as I was doing that, first I came to this situation where the hidden movement player had moved 5 spaces. Now, in this particular game, the hidden movement player is allowed to move 0 to 4 spaces on their turn. Now, at first glance, you might say, okay, so they moved 1 extra space. Is that really a big deal? Well, unfortunately, that 1 space can be enough to completely ruin a game like this, in the same way that the piece of false information ruined the game of Mystery of the Abbey that I was talking about, because a big part of the game is always calculating what's the maximum distance our hidden quarry could be by this point in the game. So you're constantly counting spaces, going, okay, it's impossible for them to be any further than this, so we need to focus on this area. And then as more turns go by, that distance becomes larger, but you always know, okay, they can't be further than this point. So if we can kind of close down our net in this area, hopefully we can find them. So even 1 extra space is going to throw all those calculations out the window. But that wasn't the end of it, because as I kept going through the movement for the rest of the game, there was another part of the game where their agent had taken a 9 movement turn. Now, their explanation was that they had probably forgotten to record one of their movements, which would work if it had been 8 movements or less. But even if they had forgotten to record a turn, that still leaves a second time in the game where they had moved 5 spaces rather than a maximum of 4. So with that, it's like, it's no wonder we didn't have a chance to win this game at all. And I mean, worst case scenario, this player cheated and intentionally moved their character more spaces so they could win the game. Best case scenario, they weren't paying very close attention to the game because they were more interested in getting back to whatever they were doing on their phone in between their turns, and they ended up accidentally messing up a couple of times. So do I think that they intentionally cheated, or that they accidentally made multiple mistakes during the game? I mean, here's the thing. Throughout the course of my life, if there's one thing that's been consistent for me, is that the people who I loved the most and trusted the most have consistently betrayed me in terrible ways, whether they were family members or best friends or romantic partners or my wife. The one thing I've learned is that the words that come out of people's mouths mean nothing. It is the actions they do and how they do those actions that make a person and decide who a person is. So because of that, anything that I don't see with my own eyes and hear with my own ears, I just have no opinion on whatsoever. Regardless of intent, the result was the same. This particular game ended up getting ruined, and I felt bad for Evan in particular, that it ended up being not a great experience. And it even got me questioning whether I like this game as much as I do, is whether this really is the top of the genre for me in this style of game. Because one of the reasons why it was my favorite of the genre was because it is so action-packed that all movements are happening so close to each other, and there's so often, if not glimpses of the person who's trying to run away, then outright attacks against them, that the game is very action-packed for a game of this style, that it does not usually devolve into this mindless wandering. And so it got me questioning, is this really a favorite game of mine? Ultimately, I am going to stick with my previous rating of 9.5 out of 10. I can't really judge the game based on one that wasn't played properly. And I will say the good news from Evan's point of view is that he did rate the game 7.5 out of 10, saying that he is interested in trying it as the secret moving player. And all three of us did agree that playing the hidden movement player is probably the most fun part of the game, as I find it is for most of the games of this style. So I'm happy to hear that Evan was interested in trying it again at some point, playing as the hidden movement player. I have subsequently asked him if he wanted to play, and at the time I asked him, he wasn't interested, but hopefully I can get back to play this game with him at some point again. My friend had revealed that they previously had played this game only as the hunter, and they rated the game a 2 out of 10 playing as one of the hunting players. And if I had known that, I wouldn't have pulled out this game at all, because I mean, that's an abysmal rating. However, they felt that playing as the agent, despite things getting mixed up a couple of times, they did think the game is more like a 7 to a 7.5 out of 10 playing as the agent, which is kind of interesting to see the huge differences in ratings depending on what role that they were playing in this particular game. But anyways, if I actually did catch somebody cheating at a game, obviously I wouldn't play with them anymore, because what kind of person cheats at a board game? And so this would have basically been pretty much a non-issue at this point if I didn't have to sit down and make a video about this gameplay experience. Because at the end of the day, it is just a game, and life is way too short to not be having fun playing as many games as possible. Speaking of which, what have you been playing? I would love to hear what you've been getting to the table. Have you been discovering any new games lately? Are there any upcoming titles that you're excited about? You know I love to hear about it, so please let me know. Thanks so much for watching. Cheers. Half of which were rated... There's a ladybug flying into my light repeatedly. With the next game, we got back to deck building again. We played more. This ended up being the month where I think I finally figured out We're going to talk about another, which is a whole new, very share-focused type of. Moving on to what is probably. Moving on to one of our... We filled the island with disease and... The nature of those games is... Style... This is a game that I played every year on Thanksgiving, or sometime around Thanksgiving, as a Halloween Thanksgiving. That's kind of what... And all three of us did agree very much with... But anyways, if letters